We're going through the first floors, and I'm taking a look at every bathroom and every possible place that I could find out where in the world this foul smell is coming from. And it wasn't until we reached the basement. These tenants had been there for a year and apparently had elected not to sign up for a trash service.
Oh, my God.
And instead just decided to pile everything up.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 175. Today, we're going to talk about a niche in real estate investing that's very much in demand. And I'm talking about student housing, which can be very lucrative. But student housing does take a unique management approach and strategy that is different from traditional property management styles. And here to have that conversation with us is Jared Behrens, the general manager at American Realty Property Management, which manages over 325 units for over 60 different owners here in the West Michigan area. And they specialize in managing A-class single-family rentals with a specialty in college student housing. So Jared, thanks so much for being on the show today and talking about student housing with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I got into real estate probably about 15 or 16 years ago and was originally doing residential real estate sales and representation and everything. And then when the housing economy took a little bit of a tank, it was time to twist and turn just a little bit. That's when I first started getting into property management. I had a friend of mine, James Erdmans, who's been on this podcast before, who had contacted me telling me that he needed a handful of his properties to be managed. And at the time, I had a little bit of extra spare time, so I decided to take him up on the offer. And this February has actually been 9 years that I was doing it. I was surprised when I look back.
Wow, 9 years managing student housing. Now, do you own your own rental property?
Yeah, I have one of my own here in the Grand Rapids area. I've bought and sold a handful of them throughout my career in real estate, and down to one right now. And it's surprisingly enough, it's a student rental.
Okay, so you know of which you speak.
Exactly. I decided that I was doing all of this property management for everybody else that had these properties, and it was probably appropriate for me to get one of my own as well.
So set the stage for us. I mean, what is student rental housing? What is that all about, and how is it different from traditional rental housing?
It's pretty unique in the fact that one of the things that stands out the most is I tell everybody, or I ask everybody the question, would you have rented a house to yourself when you were in college? And I know the answer for me was a wild no. I probably would not have. And it wasn't that I was a bad person. It was just simply that I was kind of inexperienced at living on my own, and probably didn't really have the best decision-making abilities at the time. So that produces some really interesting issues. Obviously, there's going to be college students that are going to be, partying and possibly being really hard on a home. But there's also a massive number of them that are extraordinarily responsible, very kind, and treat a home really well. The bigger problems happen to really come in the fact that most college students haven't really had a ton of experience living on their own. So most adults or most people who've been homeowners or occupying single-family houses for a considerable amount of time, they know a certain number of things about houses. If your electricity goes out in your bathroom, you might right away think of your GFCI switch. Whereas if you're a college student, it's one of your first times that you're living outside of your home, you might not consider something like that. And so you might call in for a maintenance request or even a maintenance emergency saying that your bathroom lights are out when all that it takes is literally the push of a button. We run into issues like that pretty frequently, which makes college housing pretty unique.
Now, how do you have simple ways of dealing with that? Just getting them on the phone and talking them through a problem before you send someone out there?
Yeah, that's we found that to be very important, is to be able to find somebody that has a good knowledge in maintenance as well as excellent communication skills. They're able to save most people quite a bit of money on maintenance. Whereas most of the time, a lot of property management companies, as soon as they see some sort of a problem reported at a property, they'll send out their maintenance man, and that's typically going on to a billable rate at some point. Normally, we're trying to deal with most everything that we can over the phone first, or at least trying to get more information about whatever happens to be wrong. And a significant amount of the time, we can actually have the tenants solve it themselves.
So what percentage of the time would you say that happens?
Probably 30 to 40%. Sometimes there are things that get to be pretty unique. For example, right now when we're recording this here in West Michigan, we've had some pretty nasty winter weather over the last little while. And we actually have every once in a while a significant number of people calling with electric out issues, saying that, hey, can you send somebody on over to turn the electric back on our house? And normally the first question is, well, is everybody on your block out or just you? Oh, well, everybody on the block is out of power. Well, in that case, we can't really help you. Call up Consumers Energy and see if they can help you out a little bit more. I can't send one of my guys up on a ladder to just start jiggling some stuff around, hoping things work.
Yeah. We're in the middle of the polar vortex.
That produced some very unique problems. As you know, we had several days below zero, and as a property manager, I can just say that houses were not really meant to take that kind of cold. Most of the time, even with your furnace is you purchase a furnace with enough BTUs to keep your house comfortable in about 0 degrees. And that'll really require that your furnace is running almost full time during that 0 degree weather. Well, when we snap into, we had wind chills into the negative 40s, I think is what it was. When we snap into a time period like that, it's just rough on houses. It's rough on people. It's cold, and when it remains that cold for that long, it's you start seeing the outer edges of society begin to fray just a little bit.
Yeah, no Wi-Fi for a couple of days, that can really drive people insane.
Absolutely.
What kind of during that period? I mean, that is an extreme period, so it's a good example. What other types of issues did you deal with your student tenants?
The biggest two that we had were number one, simply freezing pipes. A lot of times we manage homes primarily in the Grand Rapids area, and a lot of these houses are pretty darn old. The insulation on some of them are not great. And as they've been remodeled throughout their lives, sometimes there's pipes that are running underneath crawl spaces that don't really have adequate heat. And not having running water in certain homes in the house was the first big thing. Obviously, bursting pipes was the other big issue that we had to worry about. So we were running throughout the city, putting in space heaters and whatever else we could, heat tape on whatever we could, just to be able to provide some reprieve for everybody that was experiencing that. The second thing was simply furnaces going out. Those furnaces had to work so stinking hard that things would just fail on them. And then ourselves, any HVAC contractors in the city, and even supply houses were really at their max of what they could provide. So I mean, we even ran into issues where something would fail on a furnace, and we would be told that there simply just weren't the parts in the West Michigan area for a couple of days until the next shipment came in,
wow.
Which was really frustrating, obviously, for tenants and even for us, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, how does college students, how do they differ in the way they handle and accept those types of problems versus your older or more traditional residential tenant?
One of the really unique things about student housing is the fact that you're dealing all with individuals. Whereas, so if you're managing 325 different units and you're managing them all as traditional family rentals, there's normally one contact point for that property, whether it be the mom or the dad or whoever. Maybe there's an uncle or something like that that's living there, and they're normally making most of the housing decisions and asking most of the housing questions. The thing that's really difficult about students is that they're typically all living as individual roommates, and they don't communicate nearly as well as what you would assume that that they would. So the communication happens to be really tough. We would often go out to a property. We'll fix something, and we'll try and let as many tenants know as possible. And a lot of times we'll get another 2 or 3 phone calls wondering why something hasn't been fixed, and it's just that nobody's communicated and let anybody know that, hey, this is indeed been fixed.
So they're calling to say it's not been fixed when they don't realize that you've already been there to fix it.
I just had one of my maintenance guys had to field an after-hours emergency call about a heat-out issue with somebody that was just steaming mad about the situation. And once we dug into it, we found out that it had been resolved hours ago. And it was actually a non-issue.
Oh, my gosh. So do they apologize at that point, or are they still upset?
They apologize, but something tells me half of them is still upset. That one in particular was actually another very unique thing about student housing, is that not only are you typically dealing with all of these individual roommates, you're also dealing a lot of times with parents. And of course, parents are only getting the information from their children. And I have kids myself, so I know the feeling. The last thing that you want to think is that your kid isn't telling the truth or being less than honest. And so a lot of times we'll run into issues where, if it might be past due rent or another issue that's happening over at the home, we will get phone calls from parents, letting us know in very certain terms that their Jimmy would never do something like what we said that they had done. And a lot of times they do. A lot of times that communication between student and parent aren't exactly crystal clear, and sometimes things are hidden. So you have to really be able to work your way through a lot of different parties who might be having a problem at just one single rental property.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat-fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. Can you share some of those examples of awkward conversations that you've had with parents?
Oh, my goodness. Typically, the worst cases are another unique thing in student rentals is roommate drama. I had a judge tell me at one point when there was some payment issues, and we were going through an eviction of a certain group. And this group, it was really all stemming from just not getting along, and they were all fighting about one thing or the other and blaming each other for this, that, and the other. And the judge had looked at these tenants and kind of said with a smile, "Listen, you can choose your roommates, you can't choose your family. Make sure you choose your roommates very, very well." And that's really it. We have a lot of roommate drama where Susan did this and we can't stand that. Can you kick her out? And then a parent will call in and say, my child is being harassed or this is happening. As far as the way that we do it in these single family rentals, we sign jointly and severally liable leases. So everyone on that lease is responsible for that lease together as a group as well as individually. So there is no kicking one person out of the home, which we've really enjoyed that stance and philosophy, because otherwise a lot of times you're being forced to choose sides between two people who are having a fight that happens to be completely unrelated.
So it's odd to me that there would be this expectation for the management company to come in and be the referee between roommate tension.
It's odd for me to think that as well, and it doesn't stop. It seems that every year we get a batch of it. We even very specifically write it in our lease, as well as a couple other papers that we'll hand out when somebody's signing their lease. As we make it very clear that we're not here to referee or police internal drama, but people have it nonetheless. And we got to do our best, to put on an excellent customer service voice and do our best to be able to try and walk people through situations while still staying uninvolved largely.
And for those listening who are writing down what you just said, what is that term you said you put in your lease?
It's jointly and severally liable. There's a couple different philosophies as far as renting out single-family homes. Some people will rent out bedrooms. I never liked that simply because at that point you'll have multiple leases for a single property. Depending on the municipality, you might run into some issues with municipalities writing room leases. And then on the other hand, you might have issues simply evicting one person. At that point, you're going to have one empty room, one portion of rent that's not being charged until you can get that room filled. Whereas if you do jointly and severally liable leases, what that means is everybody it's all for one and one for all is the way that I like to see it. And the reason why that provides such a nice advantage is because, if there's 4 people living in the home and there's one of them that isn't paying their rent, we will send out an eviction notice to absolutely everybody that's on that lease. And obviously the 3 people that are paying their bill are not happy about getting that eviction notice, and they're not going to be happy about getting evicted. So they're going to turn on that one person who happens to not be, have been paying 3 or 4 months worth of their rent portion for a while. And at that point, we have allies to be able to collect rent, which is massively valuable.
Because the other roommates are going to insist that their 4th roommate pay that.
Yeah,
rent.
and that's actually a wonderful thing about college housing and student rentals is that for the most part it's very collectible. There's definitely the instances where college students are not paying their bill and they're running into unknown issues, just like any tenant or any person would. The great thing though is that they're very collectible, like I said. So there's money down the line, right? They're going to college, which is not cheap, and so there's probably going to be student loans that are possibly available to them that they can use for their housing. Mom or dad may want to jump in because they don't want to have an eviction on their kid's record at, only 19, 20, 21 years old, whatever it happens to be. Or there might even be, a rich uncle or something like that who might get them out of a really tight situation. So as the landlord, you're typically made whole pretty quickly.
So as far as guarantors on the lease, are you expecting parents to also help guarantee the payment of the rent, or do you just stick with the student?
Typically, we will just stick with the student. Like I said, when we're doing, we do mostly single-family homes, and with that being said, the nice thing is that with 4 people on a lease, normally there's, they're all going to be very motivated to make sure that rent is being paid, because otherwise everybody loses their housing situation. So that's almost a guarantor in and of itself. I have run into it, and it's typically in smaller apartments, maybe a two-bedroom apartment or something, where I will get a guarantor because maybe I have 2 applicants that are just a little bit shaky on their own. Student housing is a little bit tough as far as applicants, simply because a lot of times they don't have any income. Sometimes they won't have any credit. They haven't really necessarily established credit. So the screening process is just a little bit unique in that. And it's something that takes a little bit of getting the hang of.
American Realty, you guys specialize in single family houses. It looks like you want everyone to kind of be on the lease. And what's the term again? Say that again.
Jointly and severally liable.
Jointly and severally liable. If you are thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition 5 years ago, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional healthcare insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. But there's another type of student housing, and I wonder if you can just touch on this, even though I know that's not part of your strategy, where you have a larger apartment building or multifamily where you're renting by the room. So can you just kind of touch on that and explain that type of student rental housing?
Yeah, I don't specialize in it, so I don't want to make myself sound like the expert by any means, but yeah, when you're going by the room, it'll typically work best if it's in an apartment situation, and then at that point you're able to actually rent out by the room. So you would create a lease for each individual room within that property, and if that lease was violated for that individual room, that one individual is kicked out, and then you fill in that room again. One of the reasons why we've stayed away from it is, again, because I don't want to have an empty room necessarily. I would rather have a completely empty house and then refill that house again, because that happens pretty rarely, whereas from what I've seen anecdotally, people getting kicked out of an individual room happens quite a bit more often because they don't have the pressure of their other roommates. The second thing is that it puts you into a little bit more of that category like what we were talking about before, where you're dealing with a lot more roommate drama. So if you happen to be placing two people inside of the same residence and possibly two bedrooms, you're kind of stuck with this responsibility of making sure to the best of your ability that they're going to be able to get along in one way or the other. And if they don't, I can guarantee you're definitely going to hear about it, and they're going to keep on bothering you until you find them a new room, which is just another cost that's going to be involved as far as the management side.
Yeah, it sounds like when you're dealing with students, especially college students, there's a whole different set of expectations, probably a sense of entitlement, or maybe mom and dad used to take care of a lot of this stuff. Can you talk about like some of the problems that creates for you as a management company?
It's definitely tough. I think if there's anybody that's out there that's a property manager that's listening, I think they're going to know that you deal with just a lot of frustrations when it comes to tenants. One of the things that I always say is that property management is actually extraordinarily easy. People management is the thing that is insanely difficult. Yeah, I mean, something that we deal with quite often is, as you mentioned in the intro, typically our company is dealing with grade A type of properties, and so these are not cheap. Between them being student rentals and grade A properties, these things are really expensive. One of the things that I say about with my rental, the reason why it's a rental is because I can't afford my own rental. What they end up paying is more than what I would really like to pay. So with that does come a certain level of expectation. First of all, there's just the natural process that they haven't lived on their own a lot. And there is a sense of entitlement. Mom and dad have normally taken care of these things. High school teachers have probably taken care of a handful of things. And taking ownership of your problems, a lot of times for some of these people hasn't really set in. Now, I'm not going to say that about everybody. A lot of people are absolutely spectacular with taking care of their own issues, and you don't hear from them, through their entire lease. But there is a very significant portion of them that, if there's roommate drama, if there's something as simple as, we'll send out messages asking people to change their furnace filter. Something that's a very easy process, but that will, blow students' minds. Of the first question that we'll typically get is, "Where's my furnace?" Oh God, where's your furnace? If we're there, maybe I should send somebody over to change that furnace filter because there might be more damage than what it's worth. And then, when we get into tough times like with this storm that hit, it can be really tough to explain to somebody that, hey, I'm terribly sorry, but everybody within this city is backed up. And things are delayed, and it's going to be just a little bit longer to be able to provide these services. One of the ones that we hit a lot of is that people were irate that they didn't think that their driveway had been plowed. Once I checked with my plow driver's GPS, I would find out that they were there 2 or 3 different times. The snow had just blown over the driveway, and it made it look like it was not plowed. And then we got even to the point where the city wasn't plowing any side streets, and so people would call our office complaining that we hadn't plowed their driveway, and one of my responses was, well, we can plow your driveway, but you're just going to get stuck on the street at that point, which is probably going to be worse than being stuck on your driveway. But it was really tough for people to be able to understand that. They want things taken care of, and to be fair, I mean, when you're young, when you're a college student, you've spent most of your life having most things taken care of. Before that, when you were in high school, when you were in middle school, you had your parents looking over you. Even if you were spending time in the dorms within your first year or two, to, typically there's a whole system there to make sure that you're not misbehaving. There are people that are monitoring the halls and making sure that nobody's throwing parties or anything else. And we're normally that first house that they live in that they'll be telling their friends about all the way into their 30s and 40s and talking about, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that at this house and those were the days and all that sort of stuff, which is part of the college experience, but you also have to be able to temper that in a certain way.
So how do you make sure they're not having crazy parties and trashing the house?
One of the nice things about the way that we do it is there's a huge demand for college housing and student housing in this area. So we're normally showing the properties very, very early. People will typically, most students like to move in during about August, which gives them a little bit of time to get used to their house, get used to the city if they happen to be moving here for something else. And getting prepared for the upcoming school year. But because we sign these leases so early, what we end up doing is we go through these properties constantly with our showing agents. And so one of my protocols is that as my showing agents or any of my maintenance guys are going through the home, they're reporting back to us about any houses that seem to be some sort of a party den, because we've definitely had those before. And at that point, once I start getting word, or my office starts getting word that there happens to be one party house or one house that's being severely mistreated, then we'll start monitoring that house a little bit more closely. We'll start doing random inspections on the home. We'll start looking for damages, and then we'll start repairing those damages right away, right during their tenancy. We're not going to wait until they move out and take it out of their security deposit. We do it right there, and then bill their account if they're doing this damage. And that way they can actually start feeling the pain of what they're actually doing while they're still in that property. And that's been a pretty effective means to be able to kind of dissuade this continual party attitude at some of these houses, and then they end up moving over to somebody else's house to go party.
A lot of landlords and rental property owners who are listening to this might be thinking, well, gee, why would I even want students in my house? It sounds like a lot more work, a lot more hand holding and just damage control. Now it's time for you to make the case for actually being in this niche of student housing. Why is it more lucrative? Why does it make sense? The rental rates are quite a bit higher than what you can typically obtain with a family. They're quite a bit higher than that. One of the reasons, obviously, is because of all the things that I've been talking about. Is that it's quite a bit more work. But with that more work, there is considerable more money in these college houses. Most of the time, despite the fact that, like what we said before, that we do jointly and severally liable leases, so everybody's on a single lease. That being said, most college students will price out everything on a per bedroom basis. And when they're pricing out these things on a per bedroom basis, the market ends up being pretty high for them. These, in this particular area, they might spend upwards of $500 per bedroom, which is a little bit over most market standards. And then depending on where you go, as we're close here to Lansing, Kalamazoo, Ann Arbor, some of those will, go all the way up to $600, $700, $800 a bedroom, depending on where they're located and which school they happen to be located next to. So the returns on them are absolutely spectacular. You just have to, one of the big things that you have to combat is vacancy. Obviously, vacancy in property in real estate investing and property management is the thing that you avoid more than anything else. That's going to be more costly than any repair that you're ever going to see. 2 months worth of vacancy at a property that you might be getting, $2,000-$3,000 a month out of. There's $4,000 to $6,000 that just left your pocket. That's the cost of a lot of different new things within your property. They turn over a lot. Most college students are only living in the property for 1 to 2 years. And that's how we really started being able to get our niche in college housing, is that we can turn our properties over within about 2 weeks. So we pre-lease them a long ways in advance. We start showing the properties that students will be moving into
for example, for this year, we have a lot of students that will be moving in August of 2018, and we started advertising and showing those properties on October 15 of 2018. And at this point right now,
almost 10, 11 months in advance.
Yeah. Yeah, and at this point, right now where we're sitting, we have about 80% of our inventory already gone and already spoken for. So the nice thing that it adds is it adds a significant amount of security. You're not necessarily having to sign up for a multi-year lease, but you're actually able to see a ways in the future, as we've signed leases for August of 2019 through August of 2020. That provides quite a bit of predictability for an investor to be able to say, okay, well, I know exactly what I'm going to be getting all the way through 2020 because I have all of my leases already locked in. So that's another huge advantage is you're getting top-notch rents, and you can typically see around the corner quite a ways, and we'll be able to provide a lot of additional security by, getting these tenants to either renew or getting a new tenant to already speak for the property long before it ever goes vacant. The only thing that the big part that we have to play in it is making sure to move the previous tenants out and the new tenants in a very short window of time so that we can minimize that amount of vacancy that's going to occur, once every year to 2 years, no matter how you look at it.
So what is it? By the end of July, they're moving out, and then you've got 2 weeks to turn the units or turn the houses and get the new tenants in there by mid-August, huh?
Yeah, we do. Our leases typically consist of 11 and a half months. That way we can reserve those last 2 weeks to be able to turn them over. And for us, it gets to be pretty crazy. July 15 is the last day of most of the leases that we have. And so we come in on July 16. We start inspecting the properties. We inspect them for damage caused by the tenants. We'll start also taking a look at what needs to be fixed in the property, any sprucing up of it, painting, cleaning, carpet cleaning, new carpet, new flooring, anything that happens at any of these properties, we have to squeeze that in a 2-week period of time. And from July 16 to August 1st, for our company specifically, we have to process about 120 properties within that 2-week period of time, which becomes very challenging each and every year.
Yeah, how do you do that?
A lot of hard work, late nights, not a lot of sleep, mainly laying in my bed, staring at my ceiling, wondering what I forgot or what the next thing happens to be. Realistically, I have an absolutely spectacular staff of people at my company that do an amazing job at coordinating this whole thing. That's one of the difficult things that we've had is it's tough for us to be able to grow too much further simply because we can't process too many more homes in a 2-week period. So we have to start staggering our move in and move out periods. But the force fighting against that is that more students are interested in that August 1st move in than anything else. So those go faster. People are more interested in those. And we just have to try and set up our armies of painters and cleaners and everything else for that quick, short amount of time.
So is that the only timeline that you have to work with? They move out July 15th and you're moving them in August 1st? Do you ever have, because it seems like if you don't get a house rented in advance, then it could just be sitting vacant for a whole year.
That's not the only time. It's just by far the most popular time. So for us, our first move-in season happens on May 1st. That's when we can get our first batch of students interested in moving into properties. And we don't, I would say probably about maybe 70% of our business is student housing. So it's not just in student housing that we have, but April 16, people will have a large batch of people that are moving out. And then, May 1st, they'll move in. Same thing happens with, May 15, people will move out. And we have people moving in on June 1st and et cetera throughout the summer. So that's, any of the other months, the closest that we have is maybe 60 to 80 different properties that are turning over versus the 120 that happen to be turning over ish in July. So July is by far the biggest one, but we still do have some pretty other big months, and we try and stagger those move in and move out dates as best as possible. But it's just tough with August being such a popular month.
Yeah, but it does seem like if you haven't rented and this is where you guys have to do your job, but if you haven't rented the house out by August, it's going to sit empty for quite a while.
Yeah, and We can typically get people in, even as late as September. At that point, school hasn't necessarily started. Beyond that, we have to start working with price drops. So beyond that, we're a little bit off season as far as students are concerned. And now we're going to have to drop the price to be able to attract a larger audience of people, because we've probably missed most of our students. We're not going to get a ton of students interested in the property. So instead, we're going to switch on over, see if we can rent it out as a traditional family rental or traditional rental as you'd otherwise see it. The really tough one is with the investors that I work with. A lot of times they'll have a glut of properties that are getting finished maybe around right now, which happens to be late winter, and those properties, the earliest that we can possibly rent something out really is about May 1st.
Oh, so investors who have just acquired a property, maybe they're rehabbing it, getting it ready to be on the market. If they want students in there, they're going to have to wait till March.
Yep.
At this point, at the earliest.
I've been working through a couple of kind of crazy ideas that have not necessarily come to full fruition yet. But I have a couple of ideas that I want to. One of the things that I hate is I hate inefficiencies, and one of the most inefficient things that I can ever see is a absolutely beautiful grade A rental property. I mean, this is a gorgeous human shelter that sits vacant for months, and there's nothing that bugs me more than seeing that sort of thing. And I know that nothing bothers the investors that I work for more than seeing that as well, mainly because theirs is pocketbook oriented. So I've been working on a couple of ideas to be able to work with some shorter term rentals, to be able to fill a property up during a small space of time, let's say, February through, maybe June 16 or something like that, before I can get somebody to move in July or August. And I can put it on what I refer to as the cycle. I will typically never, when an investor brings a property to me, and if I see that it's going to be a grade A rental or a student rental, I try my best never to sign leases during the winter time, because that's just setting you up for a cycle of disaster.
Yeah,
one year
it's
after
going to come
another.
due the next winter, and you're going to have the same problem all over again.
Absolutely. So I would rather deal with a short-term lease for a small amount of time, and then once that lease is complete, then we move on over to something that's a lot more long-term, and then we can put it on a good 1-year cycle where we know that it's going to be coming vacant at a very popular time for people to be moving.
Now, do you provide this housing? Is it furnished and stocked, or do the students bring their own furnishings?
The students always bring their own furnishings. It's something that I've kind of looked into a little bit in the past, but I haven't been able to find a great way to make a business model out of it quite yet.
Because I know the larger apartment way of doing student housing is you're basically renting a fully furnished unit.
Yeah. Luckily, we haven't had to deal with it. It seemed to me, I've looked into it. There seems to be some complexity as far as furniture is concerned, and I've seen it before where these rental properties with students in them, students have done some damage to properties, and I would dare say that most properties, and our properties specifically, are really durable. They're made for this thing. Most of the investors that I work with, they try in what they call renter-proof homes, where they try and make it so that it's really, really difficult to actually damage these things. So I've always been nervous about what people will do to furniture, because that's not nearly as durable as what most of the home is. And what I've seen body-size holes in drywall, and that just makes me wonder, oh my gosh, what would they do with their couch or their TV or anything else that's in that house? So I've avoided it for the most part, but it's still an idea that I've tried to kick around because that would help me with some of these short-term vacancies that I have, where somebody may have a brand new property that they just purchased or remodeled, and I don't have a great solution for occupancy until further in the summertime.
Have you tried anything that works with filling those short-term vacancies?
I've tried a couple things. I have worked with insurance companies before. where there might be someone who recently had a fire at their home, and they're maybe working with someone individually who's maybe loaning them furniture, and then I can get them into a house for a much reduced price. Most of the time, their insurance company's paying for it, and normally they're really great renters. That's a spectacular way that I've been able to find, but it's really tough to be able to make that timing work.
Yeah, the timing is tricky.
It's so difficult. So, every once in a while, if I get a gift set in my lap, I'm as happy as can be. But otherwise, I haven't been able to find a model that I can use over and over again. It's continuous searching process. I'm hoping, like I said, I've been kicking around another couple ideas. Hopefully, if I come back here again, I'll be able to talk about some great idea that I ended up having to make these properties a little bit more efficient if they have some sort of vacancy.
Yeah, if you come up with something, let us know. So I want to get back to kind of why this is lucrative. But before we go there, just tell us what kind of house is typically suitable for this type of student housing.
You get some economies of scale as far as bedrooms are concerned. So a lot of the people that I work with have, first of all, most people that I work with on these grade A homes have completely remodeled the house, and I love the philosophy. I love the philosophy of going through a home, replacing all of the most expensive things that are there at the house. If you're picking up the house on the cheap and you're fixing it up from top to bottom, if you're putting on a new roof, new HVAC, new electric, new plumbing, new everything, you know that probably for the next 20 to 30 years, you're not going to have a large capital improvement that you have to put back into the home. You're going to have small things that are going wrong or being broken, but you don't have anything that's really going to throw you for a big loop. So that seems to be a philosophy that works really well for most of our investors, is to walk through these places, like I said, renter-proof them, and fix all of the mechanicals and anything that's going to be a big ticket item. Bedrooms, like I said, are very valuable, and bathrooms. Don't mess around with your bathroom size. If you're interested in trying to work with a student crowd, bathrooms are very important. Jack and Jill bathrooms, where there's a door between the toilet and maybe the sink, is super valuable, because one person can be doing their business in one room and the other person can be blow drying their hair in the other room, and they're not really necessarily bothering each other. Another thing that a lot of people will overlook, and it's really difficult for us when we're trying to fill a home, is bedroom size. As far as these students are concerned, their living space is their bedroom. Everybody is probably going to sit in the living room, watch some Netflix, and eat some ramen noodles or something like that. But there's really no organized family time at any of these properties. Most of the time, what's happening is these students are, maybe eating in their room. They're going to be studying in their room. They're going to be, even just their entertainment time, a lot of times is in their room. If you get a house with extremely small bedrooms or extremely small closets, it's really difficult to be able to get students in there, because that is their entire space. You need space for a bed, and a good sized bed. The day of college students sleeping on twin beds is largely gone. You need to have at least space for a full size bed, some sort of a dresser, or some sort of storage armoire or something that they're going to bring in to put their clothes and whatever else in. And then as well as a desk. You need to have plenty of room for a desk, and then some room to walk around that.
Now, is it one student per bedroom? Is that typically what you're seeing?
Most of the time, yes. One of the really difficult things, a challenge with student housing, and this depends on the municipality that you happen to be working with, but many places will have overcrowding ordinances. So the city of Grand Rapids, here specifically in West Michigan, they have an overcrowding ordinance. And that's a battle that we're continuing to always fight along with the city, is trying to make sure that these students aren't overcrowding homes. They will have a tendency sometimes, if they want to save some money, they'll try and stuff two people into each individual bedroom. It's really tough to police. We will make it very clear to them when they're signing their lease and when they're making an agreement with them, with us, that, hey, these are only the people that are on this lease are going to be allowed to be here. And we write the lease in full accordance with whatever municipality ordinances there happen to be on overcrowding or occupancy. But then we'll come back and we'll happen to find, 2-3 people living in a single bedroom, and that happens throughout, 3, 4, 5 different bedrooms in a house. And that can be really tough. It's tough on a community. It's tough on, on-street parking. It's tough on neighbors. So most of the time we try and ensure that there's only one person per bedroom. And in some of the houses that we manage, we try and ensure that, there's only one person per bedroom, and there might even be an additional bedroom in the home that shouldn't be occupied by an unrelated person, and that should be used as an office. But it's a tough thing to police. Students are typically pretty crafty when it comes to showing how many people are actually in the home.
When it comes to the house itself, how many bedrooms do you like to see to make it suitable for student housing?
Typically, I like to see at a minimum of 3. If you're moving to a 2-bedroom, you might as well move to an apartment complex and start gaining your economies of scale on an apartment complex. Those are successful models, but 2-bedroom homes are pretty tough to be able to make work. 3 bedrooms are okay, but again, pretty tough. Soon as we start hitting the category of 4 or more bedrooms, that's normally where you're getting the right property that you're going to be able to price at the right price.
How many bathrooms?
I typically say at least 2. If you have a 4-bedroom home, you can get away with 1. But if you have 4 college girls, they're probably going to want 4 bedrooms. That's one of the things that I tell people when they're maybe looking at investing in a property that they might want to fill with students. Is keep in mind that this isn't a family showering. This is 4 completely unrelated individuals that might be showering in this house, and they're going to want their own time. They're going to want their own space. That's why big bathrooms are another big one. If you have just one small bathroom in a 4-bedroom home, it's indeed going to be a little bit hard to rent, because that's going to be something that most of the students are going to be looking for.
So getting back to just why student housing, you can make more money at it. Let's say you have 3 or 4 bedrooms. How does the income from those 3 or 4 bedrooms from students compare to if you were just renting it out to a traditional resident?
I typically see about a 25+% premium on most of these student rentals. They're paying 25% more at least. Like I said, a lot of it is just because of location. Number one, if you happen to be able to get a home that's close to a college community, that's where they're going to be. The second thing is to be able to get a house that's close to public transportation. A lot of times students don't necessarily have a car or don't want to have a car, and they want to be able to get from campus back to their house and back to their favorite hangout. They want to be able to do that by public transportation. So that's very valuable as well. So if you can find the right location, the right property with the right number of bedrooms, and if you're close to a college campus, there are chances that if you explore that college housing market, you'll be very successful. The last thing that, in my opinion, is a must as far as student rentals are concerned is showing those properties very early. The market is very competitive. Most of the students that we have, like I said, they're looking in October of the previous year for something that they're going to be moving into the summer of the next year. They're looking early, and I also find that your most responsible groups are coming very early. Those are the ones that are planning in advance. They've established a group of friends, and they're excited about getting into whatever home that that they're interested in, and they're ready. They're prepared. They know what they're doing. As we move later on in the season, I find a lot of other people that are kind of scabbed together groups, where they might have been 2 separate groups that couldn't find a house, and they're going to kind of pile together. And at that point, there's going to be an increased possibility that they don't get along. The group breaks up, and you're just dealing with a whole bunch of roommate drama.
Well, what are some of the costs that are associated with having this type of housing?
I would say the biggest one typically is your turnover cost. Whereas most models, you might get 3, 4, 5, 10 years out of a single tenancy. In college housing, you're lucky to be able to break into 3 years. And so having that property turn over every single year gets to be pretty pricey. If somebody's living in a house for a handful of years, there might be some deferred maintenance that's not doing any damage to the property, but also might not necessarily really bother the tenants that happen to be in there. So they're not going to report it. Things are going to go on. And when their tenancy happens to be done in 5 to 10 years, that's when you make that repair. In the college housing scene, it's turning over every year to 2 years. And so any of these items, you're going to have to fix up for the next people that happen to be coming in. You have to be able to make sure that that property is in pristine condition. And you have to make sure it's in pristine condition after students who have possibly been really rough on a property have gone through it, and you have a really limited time to be able to fix it up and get it into grade A condition again.
And from the property management standpoint, are you paying more for property management for a property manager like American Home Realty who's managing your student housing than you would for traditional rental housing?
Typically, I would say so. I know that here in this area, we're a little bit more expensive than what our competition is for the most part. There's a couple that are right up there with us. There's a couple that are significantly below what we are. But because of the additional workload, that's why we're normally charging that upper rate. When the main difference, like I said, the main difference is the difference between property management and people management, because instead of 350-ish different individuals for each unit, instead we're dealing with closer to maybe 1,500 or 1,600 individuals, and that takes a lot more staff, takes a lot more work, takes a lot more policies, and so it normally ends up meaning that it's a little bit more expensive to manage the property.
Well, Jared, I know you have a couple stories for us, so you care to share those before we wrap it up?
That's the great thing about property management is that you're always going to have absolutely spectacular stories one way or the other. It doesn't matter if it's student rental or whatever, you always have a couple of good stories in your bag. But some of the more memorable ones that I have, one particular property, it was an unfinished basement at this property. And so most of my showing agents weren't really going in and taking a really close look at this basement necessarily. And so it gets to be, the summertime and the tenants move out and we go through this property. And the minute that I walk into this property, I start smelling it. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? This place just absolutely reeks. And so, we're going through the first floors and I'm taking a look at every bathroom and every possible place that I could find out where in the world this foul smell is coming from. And it wasn't until we reached the basement, and there's this back room to the basement that, that nobody really goes into for any particular great reason during most of the year, except for during a property inspection. And when I entered into that room, I saw to my left and right, there was just a small little trail in between, but these tenants had been there for a year and apparently had elected not to sign up for a trash service.
Oh my God.
And instead just decided to pile everything up to the left and right of either side. I forget how many dump trailers that we had to take out of that place, but it was an entire, and most of it was, Little Caesars pizza boxes and whatever else that had been there. We were lucky that there weren't more, animals or pests that were in the home from this, but the stench was absolutely amazing in the property.
Oh my God, that's awful. So do you have it in your lease now that they have to pay for trash?
Well, the thing is I had it in the lease originally, and apparently they just glossed right over that, and that was not that big of a topic for them.
Now is it that they decided not to pay for it, or they just didn't realize, hey, we should be paying for trash, so why don't we just keep it downstairs in the basement?
I'm not sure. I think it might have been some sort of a combination of the two, and maybe not understanding how the trash system worked in this city. And then, maybe once they found out, they thought, forget about it. We've already got a good thing going with this trash down there, and they just kept it rolling.
That's unimaginable. Oh, that's awful. That's a great note to end. Definitely there can be some issues and some problems, but it does sound like a very unique and lucrative way to rent out your property.
It is. And as far as the property management end, boy, it is it's a treat to be able to come into your office every day and constantly be challenged by new issues and new things that you'd never think that you'd see pop up. Property management is a struggle. It's definitely a thankless job and a tough one to be able to get into. But if you like a challenge, if you like to be able to set goals, it's a spectacular arena to be able to get into. You have to be extraordinarily organized and ready to deal with anything that comes your way. But if you like that sort of thing, you will never be bored any particular day at work. That's for sure.
It's been a really interesting conversation. So thank you, Jared, for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.